All right, what's going on, everybody? Let's get started. So, first things first, hey everyone, thanks for coming to this. I absolutely appreciate it. My name is Adam Dzyacky. I am the product manager here at Cireson, and my primary focus here is around our roadmap as it pertains to Service Manager within that broader context of the Microsoft System Center suite of technologies. And it may go without saying, hopefully it doesn't, but certainly as it pertains to moving Service Manager forward with the use of cloud technologies such as those featured in Azure. Now, before we really get into this, I want to start by saying and sharing that really all of these presentations today are being recorded. So if you want to come back or if you miss something, you absolutely can do that. All of these will be posted online afterwards. Now, if you have any questions, I will be available in a virtual lounge shortly following this presentation. So if you have questions about anything I talk about today or anything else that comes up, by all means, please come hang out with me. And as far as all attendees go for Cireson Innovate today, we also have a digital lounge, a digital open floor, if you will, that's open all day for all attendees. So come and go as you please. If you're not in this session, you can also speak with other attendees and other Ciresonites as well. So open floor covered. So that out of the way, like I said, I was starting by explaining a little bit about who I am and who I am here at Cireson. But I do want to talk about really who I am in a non-Cireson capacity. And for those of you that don't know me, I have spent the last decade now with an intense focus around System Center and all things PowerShell. So I'm not here today to talk to you as Adam, the product manager. I'm here today to talk to you as Adam, the guy that has a probably ridiculously unhealthy obsession with process improvement, automation, and transformation using those Microsoft technologies. And if it sounds like I just put a bunch of buzzwords together for the sake of just saying it, I didn't. I genuinely love doing all of this stuff, and that's why I'm doing this today. That's why I'm talking about this. That's why I'm in the Cireson community. And you can always find me, and I'll gladly talk to you about this stuff because I'm very excited about all of it. It's fun. So to that point, speaking of fun and keeping things innovative, that's why in the last few years, what I've done is I've started turning a focus to artificial intelligence and bringing it to ITSM practices in a meaningful way. And I also put another link on here on this bullet point, on my list of bullet points here rather, which is the link to my GitHub. And I'm known as Ad Hoc Adam over on GitHub. And if you've been to that page before, or you haven't been to that page before, my contribution of sorts to the service manager space is that I'm one of the guys that's been responsible over the last couple of years for this project that is known as the Sms Exchange Connector. And it is an open source exchange connector for Service Manager that allows you to actually call out to some of those AI services that Azure provides and a host of other functionality as well. But it's not important right now. We'll keep moving on. So, like I said, the purpose of this conversation, the purpose of this presentation is related to talk about don't forget the rest, or don't forget the first two letters in SCSM stand for System Center. And I want to level set where I believe most people who are joining the call today probably are, and that's approaching System Center through the lens of just Service Manager and not necessarily the wider stack. And let alone integrating it with non-Microsoft technologies. And to be honest, I don't think that's really intentional. I just think it comes down to your particular focus, right? If you're resolving incidents, why would you be an orchestrator all the time? If you were building a service catalog out, why would you be checking in on Configuration Manager, right? Again, I think it's easy to be accidentally siloed here simply because of one's focus and your day-to-day job and responsibilities. However, if this is the only way you're looking at things, I believe you're really missing the bigger picture of service delivery. And I say that because if we're siloed in our ways of using only a self-service portal to generate service requests, if we're only using email to generate incidents, we are ultimately limiting ourselves and how effective we can be as an IT organization. So it's not that what you're doing right now is bad or wrong or anything. Believe me, it's not. It's awesome. I assure you it is awesome. Keep on doing what you're doing. But surely we can agree that as a result of this, we end up being more reactive than proactive, right? If the service manager folks are only looking at service requests, if the operations manager folks only see incidents, the config manager folks only see patches, and none of these people talk, interact, or look to integrate with one another, we have a guaranteed, unintentional, siloed approach to problem solving. And so that's why when we look at the greater stack of System Center, it's important to recognize that while Service Manager is that central hub of work, it's also one that is a very manual central hub of work. After all, it's just simply tickets, right? It's incidents, it's service requests. But if you're only looking at Service Manager like that, there is so much more to gain by branching out to the rest of Service Manager and certainly the rest of the System Center stack. And I suppose rather than look at Service Manager as the center of this System Center suite, which I certainly is, we can also look at it on this spectrum of organizational needs. And I've long viewed System Center in this way because it maps to where I believe organizational emphasis is placed, right? Do we care more about device management or do we care more about employee and process management, right? And I want to be clear here. Is it wrong to be device focused? Absolutely not, right? The last thing you want is non-compliant hardware, machines missing patches, or non-performance systems. I get it, makes perfect sense. With you all the way, device management matters. Is it wrong to be employee focused, right? Of course not, right? You want to ensure that people get what they need when they need it, that IT isn't getting in the way. But surely we can agree that we need to strike a balance here. And that's why it's using this spectrum of tools we're able to solve really any problem thrown our way or improve any process that we want in our organization. And you'll notice that I've laid the tools out in this particular order because when I think of device management, I tend to always go to configuration manager. When I think about improving employee satisfaction and self-service and improving my automation capabilities, even outside of an employee process, I think of service manager and orchestrator. And SCSM kind of lives in this interesting intersection of the two, which is why I placed it where I did, because SCSM clearly is a very device management oriented product, right? It is meant to monitor the health, the performance of systems, and then alert on those things accordingly. But surely we can agree that the alerting of those systems has some effect on our employee satisfaction, on our internal employee process, right? How fast is something performing? How slow is something performing? Will employees raise incidents about that, right? And so hopefully you can start seeing where this is going, right? There's clearly some correlation between a poor performing system and your employees saying something versus you being notified about that system in advance before your employees say something, right? Again, moving from reactive to proactive. So when we talk about moving beyond simply just tickets from employees, beyond just simply requests or incidents from employees, we have the tools we need to solve this problem, or again, any number of problems. We have an ITIL aligned tool in Service Manager. We have an alerting mechanism in Operations Manager, and we have nothing but opportunity to augment these and other business processes in Azure. So how do we actually start taking advantage of this? Well, again, if we're going to move from reactive to proactive, let's start talking about what are scenarios that are worth alerting on and getting in front of. So I threw some scenarios up here, and these alerts, whether they come from SCSM or Azure Monitor, all of these alerts could generate an incident, right? And as you know, I've obviously put a lot of scenarios on these slides, but you'll notice that these examples have less to do with performance and health than maybe concepts you would typically associate with SCSM. and more to do with a security slant or a change front, right? When something occurs in my environment. And the reason I highlight these is that because when I think of Service Manager as like the ultimate data source for everything about my environment that all roads lead to, I really want to lean into that, right? How many times did someone rights? How many times did someone elevate someone else's rights? Was something provisioned outside of a change request, outside of a service request, right? Being able to track, manage, and work these events, work these work items is the cornerstone of good ITSM practices through Service Manager. But as great as these alert scenarios are, then what? Like, what do you do? I mean, an Azure resource was provisioned, okay? Or you know what? Antivirus definitions are out of date. Surely we need to fix this, right? Or someone was added to a sensitive group. We probably should tell someone. Should we ask someone? Right? Again, these are great alert scenarios in an alert silo, but every alert should. Well, actually, no, let me take that back. Every alert must be actionable. Otherwise, it's just noise. It's just an email notification. But the point is, it's noise that something people soon learn to ignore, right? So instead of looking at this from the angle of a scenario for alerts, let's look at this from the angle of scenarios for incidents. Specifically, what are we going to do with that incident? If we have an alert associated with our Azure resource being provisioned, what do we do next, right? Does the urgency change based on what the type of resource was? Back to the antivirus definitions. Is it an issue if it's an air-gapped development machine? Probably, but certainly a lower priority, right? Or someone was added to domain administrators. Do I care more or less if it was a self-elevation, right? Or I have an account that was created in Active Directory outside of my standard onboarding practice that I've made inside of Service Manager. Again, these are questions that are worth answering, and they need to be answered because it all comes back down to one thing. Before we start defining what a good alert is, what a good incident is, the other question that's worth asking are certainly these. And the reason we need to ask these questions is because process matters. It has to matter. It must matter, right? Otherwise, we're just generating noise. And we don't want to generate noise. We want to generate value with these tools. And we certainly can. So let's build one of those processes. And the process that I want to build is one that was on a previous slide, but it's also one that I've seen asked across the internet on a host of different occasions. And it's, I want to monitor if someone's added to domain admins, which perfectly valid, right? Or I want to monitor if someone's added to a sensitive group. Maybe not an out-of-box one, maybe a custom one that's protecting a file share or an application in my environment. But I want to go one step further with this. Rather than just simply, I'm going to use SCM to create an alert, I'm going to use System Center to define a process, and I'm going to automate that process end to end. And in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have SCM raise an alert. I'm going to have Service Manager capture and log an incident, and I'm going to have Orchestrator pull the user from that group. So once we're done with that, we'll have a complete end-to-end solution built inside of System Center. You can use this. You can apply to a host of any other scenarios. And so what we're going to use is those same tools, SCM, Service Manager, and Orchestrator. And the best part is that if you think that, oh, it sounds like that's a lot to build, or this sounds really heavy, the good news is an overwhelming majority of this work is already done for you. We already have an alerting tool. We already have an ITSM tool, and we have an automation tool. And the best part is that these three tools all integrate with each other out of the box natively. We can use the SCM alert connector to create a Service Manager incident. We can trigger an Orchestrator runbook from that Service Manager incident. In fact, the only things that we need to build are some really 100 level concepts. We need to build a rule in SCM. We need to create an incident template in Service Manager, and then we need to build a runbook to support our custom organizational process. So without further ado, let's get at it. And I'm going to go over to a demo that I've recorded earlier so you can see how this works.
All right, so to get things started, I'm going to first start off in the Operations Manager console. And I'm going to start by creating a brand new management pack called Active Directory Security Events. And I did this just by clicking Create Management Pack, gave this a title, again, Active Directory Security Events, and my management pack was created. And with my empty management pack created, I'm now able to start putting my customizations inside of it. And to do that, again, because I want to monitor for changes to the domain admin group, I want to know when someone is added to a domain admin group. What I'm going to do first is head over to the authoring tab. And I'm going to go to groups. And you'll notice there's a group I've created here called prod domain controllers. Because when it comes to identifying, my set of alerts and maybe, scoping these in the future, maybe I only want to apply this alert to my production environment and not necessarily in a dev capacity, right? Or a set of dev servers, right? So I just wanted to run through this real fast so that you could see this, although I know full well, probably many of you out there in SCSM probably have these groups already created. And my group is pretty simple. Again, here's the name, the description. You can see that it has no explicit members, but my dynamic members is also pretty simple. In my case, since I'm in a lab environment where I only have one domain controller, I've just said, as long as the computer is a domain controller, it's a part of this group. But you obviously are open to, you're free to change this to be whatever kind of criteria you want, right? So I just wanted to show that real fast. And this group is saved. It exists inside of my Active Directory Security Events MP, right? So my MP contains this group. And with that group created, I'm now going to head over to rules. And inside of rules, this is where I'll be able to create an event rule that says anytime a user is added to a group, specifically domain admins, I want to create an alert and I want to forward it over to Service Manager. Now, you'll notice I actually already have a few rules here. In fact, I only have 3 listed here, and that's because I've scoped this list of rules down from everything that is contained in SCSM and everything SCSM has to offer to only show me the rules that pertain to Windows domain controllers. And while I've already created a user added to domain admins rule, I'm going to walk through this so you can see how easy this was. So let's hit create rule. And I'm going to create an event-based alert generating rule based on the NT event log. And as is the case with Service Manager and Operations Manager, the question you're asked more times than not is, where would you like to save this customization? Where do you want to put this thing that you're creating? And I can think of no better place to place this than the management pack that I've created to do this, right? I can't think of a better place than the management pack whose intended purpose is to monitor for security events inside of Active Directory. So I'm going to choose my management pack that I've created. Then I'm brought to this new page where I can define the rule name and description. So let's just say user added to domain admins. Domain admins group. And I'm only going to change one thing on this entire form, and it's this. I'm going to change the rule category from alert to custom. And it may not be entirely obvious why I'm doing this right now, but rest assured, I'm going to come back to this. Just know I'm very intentionally doing this. And then, of course, this rule targets my Windows domain controller class, right? Because when a user is added to a group, I wouldn't see that on a SQL server. I wouldn't see that on a web server. I wouldn't see that as a Azure resource group change, right? I mean, there's only a subset of things in my environment where this event will occur. And in this case, it's on my Windows domain controllers. So now, of my Windows domain controllers, what is the event log I am most interested in monitoring? Well, the one I'm interested in monitoring is the security event log, right? Because that's where those changes would occur. So now, of all of my domain controllers that all have a security event log, what is the event that I am interested in reading on those domain controllers in those security event logs? Well, I can tell you that I know the event ID is 4728. But how did I know it was 4728? Right? I mean, how would you go about finding this information? Well, with a quick search, you will more than likely arrive at this piece of documentation from Microsoft. And it's event ID 4732. A member was added to a security-enabled local group. It's not quite what we want, right? We want to know when a user is added to a domain group, like domain administrators or DHCP admins, whereas 4732 is when a user is added to a group on a server, right? So the local admin group or the local RDP group or et cetera, et cetera. Although I will be the first to admit, as I'm saying it out loud, monitoring and alerting and creating an incident for those changes, that too is also pretty interesting, but that's for a different discussion. So I'll try to stay focused here. So this document actually reveals that 4732 actually has some very like pieces, some very like events. And if you read through this, it eventually reveals that 4728 is notifying you when a user is added to a domain group. Perfect. I don't need an event source because, again, I just want to know when 4728 occurs. But I don't want to know every time 4728 occurs. I want to know when 4728 occurs and a user was added to domain admins. So I'm going to hit Insert, Expression, specify an event parameter used, parameter 3 equals domain admins. But again, similar to how did you know it was 4728? One, what's a parameter? Two, how did you know it was parameter 3 of all things? I get the domain admin part, but how did you know this? Well, back on this documentation of 4732, if we scroll down, you'll notice that Microsoft actually includes the raw XML data associated with this event. So every time the event fires, we always have this data associated with it. And if you look really closely in our event data section, we actually have the discrete data points associated with this event. We know the that was added to the group. We know the user that did the adding, and we know the name of the group. In fact, if we count 1, 2, 3, parameter 3 is the name of the group. And that's exactly what I've done here. And I also know from some further reading that if I choose parameter 6 equals the user that did the adding. Sorry, I typoed that. So in this case, what I'm saying is I want this alert to fire anytime a user is added to domain admins, as long as the user that did the adding is not my System Center orchestrator add user service account, right? Because I really want to set myself up for success in the future. Maybe I want to build a request offering in Service Manager that allows someone to ask for privileged access or join a privileged group. Well, I don't want this alert to go off all of the time, right? I really only want it to go off when someone does the addition, but not when orchestrator does the addition. So let's go to next. And then here's where I configure my actual alert. This is where I configure the SCSM alert name and alert description. And I'm just going to clean this up a little bit. I don't need this prefix. But the other thing to also point out here is that the SCSM alert name will become the Service Manager incident title. The SCSM alert description will become the Service Manager incident description, right? So I'm going to have I'm essentially configuring a template here so that when the event occurs, it fires and it immediately maps into that incident inside of Service Manager. But the other thing that I said I wanted to do with this is I also wanted to remove the user from the group instantly. And to do that, I would need to know the user that did the adding. Maybe I want to notify them. I need to know the group that was added, and I would need to know, oh, that's right. All of those things I have in my event parameters, right? So if I head over to custom alert fields, what I'm going to do is I am going to set my custom alert fields to be those very same discrete data points, right? So let's go like 2, 3, 4, 5, right, and so on, right? So I can map those unique parameters to their own distinct fields inside of this SCSM alert. And this SCSM alert and its distinct fields will float over into Service Manager, and so that I can grab those and automate those with Orchestrator. I'm going to hit cancel here, and I'm also going to cancel this out because, again, I just wanted to walk you through this because what I really wanted to show you is how easy it is to come back and change this after the fact. So I already have this rule created, right? User added to domain admins. You can see the rule category is custom. Here's my configuration. So let's go to edit. Here's the security log. Here's my expression, right? I want to be notified if it's a 4728, if it's about domain admins, and as long as it's not this user that did the adding. I want an alert to fire. That alert is, here's the title, here's the description. I have my custom alert field set. And then I'm almost done here in SCSM. I've defined my alert criteria. So how do I get this over to Service Manager? Well, what I have to do next is over in SCSM, go to Administration and head over to Internal Connectors. And here in Internal Connectors, you'll see that I have my SCSM Service Manager Incident Connector. And if I open this up and I open up this subscription, you can see I gave this thing a title, Active Directory Security Events, description. When I go to next, the first thing that SCSM prompts me with is, okay, well, of everything that I'm monitoring, what is the group of items, what is the group of objects you are interested most in, that you want, whose alerts you want to forward over to Service Manager? And again, as you'll recall at the beginning of this, I had a group that I created called prod domain controllers. So again, this is my first step of right-sizing this and scoping this down. I don't want to create incidents from everything in SCSM. I just want it from this group. And of this group, I only want events as they pertain to the Windows Domain Controller class, which again could still be a lot, because if you're monitoring domain controllers and you have some, maybe you're using the defaults from Microsoft, there still could be some extra alerts in there too. And I don't want to forward those over either. I want to scope this down even further. And so when I hit next, that is exactly what I'm given the ability to do. I can now say anytime an alert created by that group, right, of domain controllers, as long as that alert is an error and has a priority of high or medium and is new or closed, and as a callback to the beginning here, as long as the alert category is custom. So I chose custom because I wanted to show you just, again, how much you can scope the criteria here to define when an alert becomes an incident. And so that's why I went with custom, and you can see that here. Anytime a custom alert is fired, this will make its way over to Service Manager. So with that said, we're pretty much done here in SCSM. So the question is, if SCSM is going to be throwing these alerts, how does Service Manager receive them? And more importantly, we really want to apply a Service Manager incident template when this event occurs, when this alert occurs. So this probably should be of no surprise to really any of the Service Manager administrators out there, is we're going to create a brand new incident template. And my incident template here, the one thing that's worth pointing out is that you'll notice that the class is not just the regular incident class. It is a special one. It is the Operations Manager generated incident class. And this is included out of box with Service Manager. And it's for this exact purpose, alerts making their way over from SCSM into Service Manager. So let's open this up so you can see my template and how very little actually exists in here. I've really only set up 3 things. I've said, well, I want this to go to my security team. The source is Operations Manager. And I also filled out a classification, right? Because I want all of this data to be very well formed and of a certain shape, if you will. So anytime this alert fires, this is the template that will be applied. And the other reason that it's so important that I chose the operations manager generated incident class and not just the stock incident class is that on the extensions tab are all of the fields that SCSM will populate in Service Manager. And so if you look really closely, you can see that I have the alert ID and I also have all of my custom fields, which is perfect if I want to be able to trigger runbooks that automatically remove a user from the group. So I'm going to hit cancel here, right, because I've already created my template. But the next thing I need to do is I need to define how the alert is received, right? Over here in SCSM, I defined how SCSM will throw the alert to Service Manager. But in Service Manager, I need to define how that alert is going to be received, how Service Manager is going to catch it. And so over here in my SCSM alerts, SCSM incident connector, right? I'm going to open this up. I'm going to go to alert routing rules. And you'll notice that I have a rule here called Active Directory Alerts. And here in Edit, I've said anytime an alert comes from SCSM that has a management pack, I'm sorry, let me repeat that. Anytime an alert is generated from SCSM that comes from this management pack, apply this template. And if you'll notice, you look really close, the name of the management pack is the management pack I created in SCSM, Active Directory Security Events. Anytime an alert is generated from this MP, apply this template. That's it. So with that said, we probably should see this thing in action. So I'm going to go to Active Directory, and I'm going to go to Richmond here, and we'll just add him to a group, domain admins, hit OK. So maybe Richmond approached me. Maybe Richmond just hit me up and said, you know, I need to get out of this group, or I only need it for a couple minutes, or I'm doing him a favor for some reason. You'll notice Active Directory lets me do it. Of course, I had the rights to do it, so I'm allowed. But over in SCSM, I've created this view in SCSM called Group Alerts. And what it monitors for is anytime one of these alerts goes off. So if I refresh this, you'll notice that we actually do already have a brand new alert. It just came in. User added to domain admins. And if we look at this event, at this alert, you can see here's the entire event description, right? The same one that we saw in that Microsoft doc. So here's the user that did the adding, here's the user that was added, and here's the group that they were added to. And if I double click on this alert, custom fields, I have all of those discrete data points, all of the event parameters mapped to their own individual unique fields inside of the alert. I have the user's fully distinguished name, I have the user that did the adding, and I also, of course, have the group that was modified, right? And so all of this is going to make its way over to Service Manager. So let's just refresh this again. And very soon, Service Manager and SCSM are going to reconcile this. As you can see here, Service Manager now immediately writes back and says it's IR 1008. And so now I've established a communication between the alert and the incident. And if I go into my work items in Service Manager, there it is. And if I open this up and I go into my incident, again, you can see here's there's the title that came from it, the description that came from it, classification was already set, source was already set. The impact and urgency came from the SCSM alert configuration. And over in the extensions, I have all of those properties that have now come over. So now that means I can build in SCSM, visualize in Service Manager, and see this entirely through the lens of Service Manager. And it also means I now have a lot of opportunity when it comes to orchestrator runbook automation. So I'm going to cancel this because I don't need to edit this anymore. And you'll notice I refreshed this here. The incident's already been resolved, which is pretty sweet. So let's go over to Orchestrator and see what happened. So that incident template inside of Service Manager has a runbook associated with it. So anytime that incident is created, this template, this runbook, this piece of automation automatically fires. And the first step is get me the relationship between the runbook and the incident. then get me that incident. And then as long as the title contains user added to, it calls this child runbook of user added to group. And then finally, mark the incident as resolved. So what does this runbook do? Well, let's head over there. So in unauthorized group changes, which is the name of this child runbook, two things can occur. I only have one enabled, but you're going to see the relevance of the other very quickly here. Is actually, let me go back here. I actually have a few parameters that I pipe into this runbook. I have the incident ID, the user that was added to the group. Again, you can see all these custom fields that I'm mapping into that runbook. And I say first, I want to get the group, right? So here's my get the group from my initialized data step. And then finally, remove the user from the group. Because again, don't forget, I know the user that was added by their distinguished name. I know the group that was added because it's one of my parameters. So this runs in parallel as this incident resolves. So it happens near instantly. But there's something else you might notice is that I actually have a couple steps disabled. And this is really where you have the opportunity to improvise and build your own organizational process. There's one step I have here that says, I want to get the user that added the other one to a group. And so in this case, it would get me, right? I'm the one that added Richmond to domain admins. And then I want to send out an email to the user that added Richmond to the group. So use my UPN, I give it a subject, which is the incident ID and the incident title, the body, which I've made HTML. And if we expand this, you'll notice what I've done here is I've said, you know, I have a variable that says the first name from get user, changes to domain admins, first must be approved by Richmond's manager, and then it gives me a link to a request offering on my service desk portal, right? So I have completed this whole process end to end. I have completely closed the loop. And once I have this done with SCSM, I don't need to open it. Once I have this done with Orchestrator, I don't need to open it. And once I have this done with Service Manager, I can visualize all of this through the Cireson Service Manager portal. But again, it happens so fast, I have the perfect audit record right here inside of Service Manager. So with all of that said, that completes this solution end to end. So let's get back over to the presentation.
All right, so building the solution, what did we really achieve? Well, I can think of a few things. People on your team can probably sleep a little bit better, but more importantly, aren't going to have to deal with this problem ever again, right? What's important to emphasize here is that we took a process that you or others may take for granted, that you may say is not a big deal, but it's one that I promise you in an 8-hour day, in a 40-hour work week, and whatever hours you choose to work, is now one less thing that you have to deal with, and one that has produced savings for you. And not just for you, but really your IT organization, the greater organization that you work for. Because this is just one of many examples of how you can use all of these tools together to address any organizational problem and turn it into ROI. And I think these are some really impressive numbers. Again, just do the math here in your head. How often does something like this occur in your environment? How much time can you save? And how much, can your security team now safely sleep through the night? So the SCSM and Service Manager story is certainly a compelling one, and it's one that I'm certainly a big fan of because it's this super compelling way to just get ahead of the curve or be super autonomous and proactive as events occur in your environment. But it's the configuration and automation of real-time response to alerts that will happen as you get on with your day-to-day. And now I hope that example shows you more than anything, it's not out of reach. It could be done very quickly, right? That wasn't long to configure that. And it's something you can go do right now. But I will admit that it is more of a response scenario, right? What about something a little bit more employee and process centric, something a little bit more proactive? And really where I'm going with this is what about something to do with Azure and using Azure to augment some of my processes inside of System Center. So when it comes to Azure, of course, you can run VMs or deploy web apps, but I've long viewed Azure as offering services that I consume to augment my processes. So beyond just running my data center simply in the cloud, what services does Azure offer that I can take advantage of and that I would not really deploy in my own data center or take the time to configure in my own data center? And the one that always comes to mind, and it's one that I've been incredibly passionate about, again, like I said, the last couple of years, has been artificial intelligence, right? And I want to preface the next section by saying that before I really get into this, I want to use artificial intelligence not just in a meaningful way for ITSM, but I want to be able to use it without requiring a PhD. I want to be able to just use this service. And the other side of it is that I also need data to go with it, and I need good data to go with it, right? Because without good data, really without any data, AI is almost a solution looking for a problem. But if you're in tune with System Center, if you're looking at the types of things that are coming in, if you're seeing the type of events that are occurring, you are actually already thinking in this space, and you may not even realize it. And so that's why when I look at Service Manager, ITIL, and ways to improve process, AI just seems like a no-brainer, right? The question is, what data do I have on hand that I could use to train AI and improve my processes with? And Azure provides a lot of different outlets for AI, but the one that I'm interested in is the one around machine learning. And the reason I'm so involved with it is because that Azure machine learning, there is an integration opportunity between it and this project that I mentioned earlier known as the Sms Exchange Connector. And the idea is that I want to be able to read an email, its subject and its body, shoot that off to Azure, and then for Azure to predict something about the nature of that email. Specifically, I want it to predict and be confident enough to know, is it an incident or a service request? What is the classification of it? What is the support group? And if I really, cross my fingers here, being able to predict the affected configuration items, but ultimately just predict what the thing is about. What is the email about? What does it relate to? Now, to build this, we're going to be using, of course, your service manager information, your service manager data warehouse, but it can be data that you get out of Service Manager through PowerShell, through a SQL query, again, against that data warehouse, or, of course, Cireson analytics as well. And we're going to use that data extract. We are going to upload it to Azure, and we are going to then teach and train Azure to predict work items from emails based on that historical data. So if you have reports or if you've been collecting this data, it's time to be able to put this to use going forward. So let's do that in another demo. I'm going to go here to shortly and show you a little bit about how Azure ML works and how we can integrate this in a meaningful way to Service Manager processes.
Before we get started, let me just send off some emails I was going to send off to Service Manager and the Sms Exchange Connector here. Yeah, it looks good, and yep, looks good. So if we want to predict work items, we need to get involved with Azure Machine Learning, which we can do over at ml.azure.com. Now, if you already have an Azure account, go ahead and just sign in with that. But the project that we need to construct, or the experiment rather, really at its core needs to take some inputs and then predict several outputs and then give us those outputs back. Specifically, I want to be able to feed Azure a title and a description. And then I want it to tell me what the classification, support group, work item type, or even the affected config items are based on those inputs. But to do this requires data, and really not just any data. It requires prepared data. It requires well-rounded data, because we don't want to teach Azure on bad information. And so this is the part where I get to say the phrase that I'm sure we've all heard over and over again: garbage in, garbage out. when it comes to Azure machine learning, it is no different. If we teach Azure how to predict the classification of an incident on less than optimal data, it is going to make equally bad predictions. And in many ways, it's no different than like training a coworker or a new employee, right? Like, why is something classified a certain way? How did you arrive at a specific decision, right? Why did it end up in this support group? Why is it an incident? Why isn't it not a service request, right? The list goes on and on. But there should be no surprise here, because the answer to all of those questions come back to a statement that I made earlier. Process matters. It has to matter. It must matter. So I'm going to extract some data out of Service Manager, and I can do this actually through a host of different ways. I could do this through the Service Manager data warehouse. I could do this through PowerShell. I can also do this through Cireson Analytics. And the shape of the data that I'm interested in is all of the incidents and service requests that are closed that came in from email. Because again, if the work items are closed, we know they can no longer be modified. It's done. It's over, right? They're in their final resting state. And with that data exported here, we can further inspect to see, do we want to maybe toss some things out, or maybe say like, oh, this really should be a service request instead of an incident, right? So we have some ways to like further tune our data. And again, we want to do this because we want to give Azure the best possible data to learn off of, because it's going to use this again to predict those data points. So again, this is the full data set I'm going to train Azure on, and I'm going to use the subject and body of an email, or the title and description of a work item, to predict the work item type, classification, and support group. So here's my project. And this project is actually built off of a previous machine learning community experiment that was shared by Microsoft on their AI gallery. So you can absolutely dig into all of the intricacies of how this works. And I started by first dragging in that data set, right? So I uploaded my tickets and I dragged it onto my canvas. And then, and this is for all of the orchestrator folks out there, I just started wiring up these activities, right? The output of one activity becomes the input of the next activity. Now, I don't want to dive into every single activity here. I mean, their titles are somewhat leading as to what their purpose is. But suffice it to say, just the high-level overview is I start with my tickets, right? That's this. That's these. It's all 5 of these fields. This comes in, and then I can run some SQL against it. I can clean some missing data, so I can even have like some built-in error handling, right? So maybe the data that I retrieve out of Service Manager isn't pristine. So there's a way for me to do some error handling in Azure Machine Learning, and that's good because it looks like I actually have a missing subject right there. So bad data that I want to throw out and not use as part of this training. And then this process continues along before I ultimately arrive at what's known as feature hashing. And the short explanation for this activity for feature hashing is that Azure gives us a way to feed it text from our ticket data set. And then Azure will begin looking for a frequency of reoccurring phrases and words, and then assigning a weight of sorts to them. And it's this weight that we're going to use to predict, again, that type, classification, and group, right? So what are the words most commonly associated with incidents, or what are the phrases most commonly associated when we see a service request, right? And again, we're going to use that to predict those data points. And then it breaks down even further into, let me zoom out here, breaks down even further into like these subsections. And while this may look like a bit of a rat's nest of wires kind of connected all over the place, I can assure you that, while this may look complicated, it is no more complicated than the first time that you opened up Orchestrator, right? It is, it just simply takes some getting used to, and then you can kind of see how all these things connect together. And from left to right, all of these are actually predicting the work item type, the classification, and the support group. And really the only nuance between all of them is this first step that defines Well, what is the field I'm selecting? What is the one thing I'm going to make the prediction about? And so here I can further filter out the columns in my data set that are coming down the pipe through this. And so you can see I could say, I want to select all the columns except the classification and the excuse me, and then the support group that it goes to, excuse me. So this will predict my work item type. And so once I have this ready to go, I can actually just hit submit, and it's going to go off for training. Now, in the interest of time, I've already submitted this for training, and there's a really important reason why I've done this in the interest of time, is because if you choose to do this, if you decide to deploy or start playing around with this, it is the largest variable when dealing with machine learning. How many tickets am I going to submit? Am I talking about 10 tickets, 100 tickets, thousands of tickets, hundreds of thousands, millions of tickets, right? So, you know, depending on the size of that initial data set is going to change how long this training runs. And again, part of that data preparation is also, I want to make sure that I have an ideal set of data that I'm training on. So there's a lot of effort that will go into the refinement of this data that you continually train on. So now, once it's done and my ML is trained, I was in the training pipeline here the whole time. Again, this is where I upload data and it trains. What I'm going to move to next is what Azure refers to as the real-time inference pipeline. And I actually have that open in this other tab over here. Now, do not let the term, scare you off or anything, right? Training pipeline, I get it. I'm training ML, but real-time inference, but okay, there's a lot going on there. Suffice it to say, all we're going to do with this is turn that training pipeline into a REST API. We're going to make it so that we can call Azure whenever we want, whenever we need to, feed it 2 inputs, and it's going to predict and tell us what the outputs are. Again, it's the same exact thing that we set up here in the training pipeline with one small difference. Well, I guess 2 small differences. So one, we started with tickets, apply SQL, right? Run these steps. If we come back over here though, we still have the apply SQL, clean missing data, et cetera, but you'll notice now that my inputs have changed. Originally, I trained on tickets, right? And the tickets that I trained on were subject, body, case, subject, queue, right? All of my properties that I care about training and predicting on. But in my inference pipeline, I'm training on emails, and emails are just these 2 columns. It's just the subject and the body of the email. It's just those 2 inputs. And because it's those 2 inputs, when I attach a web service input to this, I have now just declared that this API takes 2 inputs. It's that simple, right? This is a no-code experience. I drag, drop, and I have a REST API endpoint that I can call from anything. And so speaking of that, let's do that right now from PowerShell, because that's a really easy way to show this. So let's head over to PowerShell. And what I've done is I've actually created a PowerShell function that just calls this API. I wanted to make this really simple for myself and also obviously for this demo. So I've created a function called getAML work item probability. I give it a subject, I give it an email body, and I hit enter, and I get back Azure Machine Learning's prediction about this brand new work item that's going to get created. I can see that Azure thinks it's going to be an incident. It's 96% confident of that. It's 98% confident of the classification. It's 95% confident of the support group. And if you're wondering what these values are, these are the GUIDs that define the support group enum, that define the classification enum. And this is just if you'll notice, I actually I declared if something was an incident or a service request. So I could know just really quickly, is the prediction an incident or a service request? Now on the flip side, I want to see how it handles a different scenario. Let's do Let's do new laptop, and I'm looking to get a new laptop ordered. Doesn't need to be anything fancy, and I'm going to hit enter. When I hit enter, Azure returns this back and says, hey, I think this is a service request. I'm 87% confident of it. I'm only 26% confident of the classification, and I'm 82% confident of the support group. Now, I think this is super awesome, right? We get to see Azure ML in action based on our data that we trained it on. But using it in the context of PowerShell and going this somewhat code route, especially when we were talking about a no-code solution, and now I'm kind of turning to code. I feel like I'm doing something wrong here almost. How do I actually see this in action? Well, if you remember at the beginning of this demo, actually, what I did is I actually sent off 2 emails to Service Manager, to the SMLets Exchange Connector that can call out to Azure Machine Learning. And what I'm going to do now is head over to the Cireson portal, where hopefully I should see those 2 work items sitting and waiting for me to show off in this demo. Fingers crossed it's going to be there. All right, good. So I have my account incident. Oh, yep, it came in as an incident. This one is a service request. So let's go to those real fast as these load up. And you can see here's my new incident, the account. I think something is locking my account out. Can you see if everything is okay? It set the support group. It set the classification. Same thing for a service request. If I come back over here, new laptop. I'm looking to get a new laptop order. Doesn't need to be anything fancy. It has a urgency. It looks like there wasn't an area that was predicted correctly, because remember that was set to it was 26%. So it was pretty low. So it didn't actually go through with it. But I mean, I'd want to be able to see these scores, you know, front and center, right? I don't want to have to be in PowerShell to see this. I don't have to run this manually in PowerShell to see this. So what I've actually done here in the Cireson portal is that I've actually exposed the class extensions for my Azure Machine Learning predictions. And so I've actually made class extensions for the incident and service request classes to store Azure's prediction and its confidence. And so that means I have a way to come back and cross-check and always reevaluate, is this doing what I need it to do? Do I need to lower my scores at all so that it, that it hits more and that I actually get, the ROI that I want out of this predictive service? So again, all in all, I really like this because it's just a process that you may simply take for granted, right? You may be fine saying everything is an incident, everything is a service request. But with this, with Azure Machine Learning and again, using this open source Exchange connector, there is no longer a choice to make. There is simply just less time filling out paperwork and more time doing.
All right, so how much time do we save using Azure Machine Learning? Well, here's the numbers, and maybe I'm being super conservative with the estimate. Maybe I'm not, right? You be the judge. You can tell me how long, on average, you think it takes for someone to read a piece of work, classify it, route it to the right support group, decide if it's an incident or a service request, where it goes, and then move on, right? And like I said, that is a lot of time spent doing paperwork. That is a lot of time spent doing paperwork. But with Azure Machine Learning, you can see how much this all adds up. It adds up really fast, right? So we've covered a couple of scenarios here. But what I hope your takeaway is that using multiple components of System Center, integrating with Azure, integrating those System Center components with Azure, gives you the ability not just to solve any problem thrown your way, but any process that you may observe, any process that you want to improve and enhance, whether it be for your security team, for your service desk, but also for yourself. So with that said, my name is Adam Dzyacky. Thanks for attending. If you have questions, like I said, I will be in the lounge. So until then, I will talk to everyone later.